Well, hello, welcome everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. We're going to be talking a little bit about the TradFi sector, along with some of the advances and innovations in the DeFi sector as we move into these mid 2020s. I'm Scott Renna. I'm our host today, but I'm joined by two amazing panelists. Both have led some transformative actions, respectively, in their organizations. The first, Jonas from Bank Frick, and the second, Katelyn from Robinhood. So, Jonas, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, my name is Jonas Gantenbein. I'm from Liechtenstein, that's in the heart of Europe, a very small country, working with a bank, Bank Frick, that is engaged with DLT and blockchain since 2016. I'm happy to be here.
Nice. Katelyn, how about yourself? I know you have some prior experience before going to Robinhood, but yes.
Yeah, hey everyone. I'm KP. I'm the Robinhood CISO for the crypto business. Prior to this, I was at Bank of New York. I was head of security for digital assets. I was in a deputy CISO role at BlockFi. And I've been in the crypto security space probably since about 2015. So I've been doing this for a little while.
Yeah. Early adopters, both of you. So it's great. So let's get into it, I guess, just to get started. Talk about some of the successes that traditional TradFi, there you go, has had just in the last 50 years that we've been using Swift, along with some of the challenges that we're facing just in terms of speed, mobility, trust, complexity, compliance. Obviously, Jonas, we worked together. You guys kind of pioneered a bunch of the DLT side of the house. Share with us a little bit about how that change has been as you sort of try and talk for traditional TradFi moving into DeFi initiatives and things like that. How has that gone for the bank and yourself?
To give a bit of context, the Bank Frick is fairly young, 25 years old, and we've been doing intermediary banking from the get-go. The usual stuff, the usual services you expect from a bank. And in 2015-16, we pivoted into the blockchain space. And usually, how banks do that is threefold. Either they go in via providing plain and simple, boring payment services to crypto corporates or crypto companies, or they do tokenization, or they do custody. And we did the first one. We sort of started much as or similar to Silvergate, a bit later though, started to provide boring financial payment services to the crypto corporates. And ironically, back then, it was sort of the same issue as is today. Blockchain being, the promised technology that sort of brings absolution and relief from the struggles we have today in the traditional payment space, is ironically the one space that is getting debanked all the time. We sort of saw that very early on and try to build a service package around that.
Nice. In terms of the challenges that you talk about, the ones that were surprises, how have you guys worked to overcome that? I mean, a lot of this industry, it comes down to trust. It's kind of moving your trust from centralized human authorities to code, basically smart contracts and architecture and everything else. How has that sort of been just bringing people along within the bank?
The main challenge from the get-go was compliance and regulatory compliance, especially in the anti-money laundering, aspect of it. So talking to regulators, make them understand what the blockchain is. Back in 2016, it was quite a challenge. I think Europe and Liechtenstein and Switzerland and all the surrounding countries are blessed with that. Our regulators are very open to that idea, or have been for a very long time. But still, it was a challenge, and also that meant sort of in the ICO boom phase, the ICO craze in 17-18, we had a rejection rate of, I think, 95% or more of clients or prospects we declined since the risks were simply too high. The other one was, back then we started providing financial services, obviously, to crypto corporates, but also pivoted into custody of digital asset fairly soon after. And back then, in 17, 18, the infrastructure was different at a different level, I'd say, than it is today. It's a different beast altogether.
Yeah, no, I definitely think the regulatory environment has just presented challenges in general for the last 10 plus years. I mean, you could argue longer. Obviously, things in recent times have shifted a little bit. Regulators are more open to these concepts, but compliance obviously is key. You want to be able to operate in your particular jurisdiction, of course, and serve your customers. I want to move over to KP just for a minute here. Obviously, Robinhood kind of has a middle ground position where it's TradFi, but there's also an aspect on the crypto side of the house. How has Robinhood sort of encountered these compliance regulations, expansion into different markets? What are the challenges, KP, that you guys have seen there?
Yeah, so like you mentioned, our makeup is a little bit different than the bank, and I think having been at BNY, I can relate a lot to what Jonas was talking about and the struggles that we face there. Also, I would say when you're moving from like a centralized platform that you already like are issuing, potentially like bonds on or cash, to get that to a distributed ledger technology is a lot of work, right? Like you almost have to parallelize that first initially to make sure that it works. And then eventually, when does like the DLT become the system of record? Robinhood's obviously a completely different like business model, right? We have retail crypto trading. So that's really more about like kind of navigating the jurisdictional landscape and the regulatory requirements and where we want to operate, specifically for like trading, buy, sell, transfers, deposits, withdrawals, things like that. So similarly, right, like you have to meet and understand your regulators, what they're looking for, what the requirements are going to be. That usually from a cyber perspective results in a lot of like uplifts and reworks of what your cyber program actually looks like so that you're able to meet all of those requirements with one program essentially. So really having a common control framework that can address everything related to all the jurisdictions that you would want to operate in.
Yep. Have you found specific jurisdictions to be easier to gain regulatory approval in versus others in general, or it's just each one's unique?
I think each one is fairly unique. It really depends on like where you're trying to go and what you're trying to offer there. I would say they're all fairly, in my opinion, they're all fairly rigorous, right? Like they're all asking for a lot of things, which I don't necessarily think is bad or good. But they do ask for a lot of the same things. Some just like take it to different levels or are more focused on certain areas. Like if you look at DORA in the EU, like that's very focused on like resilience, operational resilience, and your like key infrastructure systems, how you interact with third parties. So that requires like a lot of focus on, okay, like what do our vendor relationships look like and are we meeting those? So it kind of forces you to like re-examine those things, which I don't think is bad. Like that's great. But it's just like a lot more. Certain jurisdictions have certain, while they're all aiming for the same thing, they all kind of focus on, different aspects, requiring like uplifts or, more scrutiny on particular areas of what the regulation or framework says.
Sure. No, I mean, we all know this, that regulations tend to lag behind technology and advancement. I can just speak from a personal perspective, being at Halborn, working with different clients that have been seeking regulatory, acceptance. Several groups that I've interacted with all have a different definition of what is called wallet storage, things like that. KYC, AML is pretty much standard across the board, but it's been interesting just the different interactions that we've had. And I don't know. I kind of look at it. I agree with you, KP. I think it's a good thing that these questions are being asked, even though it's very frustrating for those of us in the know. But I also feel as if it's our responsibility to try and advance the space, educate regulators, get to know them. Jonas, like you're saying, build the relationship. Just because we're all looking to drive this adoption in a safe, secure way, so that people can trust it. And then KP, to your point about resiliency, availability, it's not 100% an area that people always think about from a security perspective. But if the system isn't working, how can people transact? So super important from a resiliency, recovery, and operation perspective.
I think you bring up a good point about custody too, and like defining like cold, deep, like super cold,
There's a different
warm.
definition.
hot. Yeah, like that means different things to different people, right? And a lot of that is related to like where the key material is, how many people are required to do signing, where the devices reside, how are you signing with them, are they ever brought online? And I think MPC versus like a multi-sig brings different challenges because you would need the shares to come together at some point. So then what does that look like? And is it technically cold, or is it, some semblance of
Somewhat
warm?
cold. Yeah.
I've always been kind of more on like the purist side. Like if it's connected to the internet, it's hot regardless. Like warm to me has never been a thing. But like that's not what most people think, and that's not how most people view this. So explaining that to regulators or interested parties is always a challenge as well on the custody front.
I completely agree. And I think the main challenge comes from putting things that are new, such as the DLT subjects, be it staking or restaking or custody, plain simple, into the existing legal framework that has been there for the last couple of centuries or decades. It's very hard, and regulators tend to not come out of their box and think about things differently. They try to push those ideas into the frameworks we already have, and I think that's troublesome. But I think at least in the EU with Mika and Dora, we sort of have discussions like staking, MEV, front-running discussions, how to protect end consumer the most, and I think we are heading in a very, very good direction there.
Good questions being asked in general. It's up to us, I think. I want to shift a little bit because I want to make sure we have enough time just to cover all the areas and then leave some time if we do have any questions. But talking a little bit about the move towards, I mentioned earlier, the trusting of code, smart contracts for execution, whether they be time-based, deliverable-based, what have you, saving a lot of time with payment systems, intermediaries. Obviously, this year and part of last year as well, although for me it's always been this case, there's been a big talk about cross-chain protocols, connecting blockchain to blockchain, this and that. And then in addition, we've kind of seen the emergence of more of an interest in privacy layers and protocols. Not necessarily revealing all of your assets, but showing that you actually do have the assets to transact. What you guys are doing today, Jonas, obviously, I worked in the financial sector. I'm well aware of what Swift is, permissioned, controlled, this and that. How do you see the move towards, blockchain permission controlled networks, cross-chain protocols and smart contracts kind of uplifting that old tech that we have?
I'd argue sort of we were the premise was, or the promise was, that the blockchain is the new disruption, right? It was, I think, in the banking space on finance, there were two disruptions so far. One being credit card, the other one being online banking. The third disruption hasn't happened yet. And I don't think, well, certainly I believe blockchain is disruptive, but I don't think the tech is the problem. I think we have the rails, we have the atomic settlement capabilities, we are working on interoperability. That's all sorted out. I think the problem more lies in power and power frameworks and governance. Thinking about correspondent banking rails specifically, I think the advantages that the blockchain brings with instant settlement, relieving potentially $1 trillion or more that is being locked up as collateral between banks as of now to provide trust, that would be in and of itself would be a huge advantage. The thing is, we have to break through legacy systems at one point, and we break open power as the establishment of power, and those in power earn too much and don't want to give their power away necessarily. So I think there's a struggle. That's what in my understanding where the circle struggles, where the ripple struggles. It's just the giving up of power and establishing new, let's say, fundamentals is it's tricky.
Yeah. It's an interesting view. I think it's a good point. Whereas we view it as, more decentralization, this and that is actually gaining in power. Others may look at it from a lack of control, whether it's to control the flow of money, remittances, intermediaries as it goes, because basically you're trusting code on this side of the house for that. KP, for you guys, again, you sit in a kind of unique position when you're looking at various chains, various protocols or smart contracts to potentially support. How does Robinhood look at it from a risk or a reputation or a technical perspective?
Yeah, so great question. Even at this is something we did. BlockFi was obviously like in a similar space too in doing this, but there's definitely a very rigorous like asset review process that includes a lot of security and technology due diligence. From the security side, like we're looking at the project and program of whatever the asset is going to be or the protocol is going to be very holistically. So like we want to understand like who created this project. Is there never an instance where there's a couple people who control all of the keys or one single person who potentially has that capability? We're looking at audits that have been done. We're looking at the code. We're looking to see if there's a bug bounty program. We're looking at previous vulnerabilities. So there's a lot of rigor that goes into this. It's a very like developed, robust framework that we do to assess like new assets and protocols that we would want to include or interact with.
Yeah, I think those points, I mean, just in general takeaway for those that are attending today and listening, if you're considering adding certain chains, protocols, or assets, all the stuff, KP, that you just mentioned. I mean, to me, I mean, they come as second nature with your traditional Web2 acquisition stuff, but we're in a new world. I mean, the same concepts still apply. It's just kind of looked at it through a different lens, just from the blockchain space. So, well, cool. I want to move on a little bit here to talk about sort of the future of finance. Some trends that we've been seeing. Obviously, if you're paying attention, you've seen the big hype around AI, not to mention AI crypto agents. We have seen a big uplift in the last 18 months or so of talk about the tokenization of real world assets, whether they be gold, uranium, airspace to rent out for people to fly their drones. And then the last sort of thing to mention is the emergence of this new sort of asset class of meme coins. Whether you're talking about Mudang, Pepe, Uwu, I mean, Fartcoin, it doesn't really matter. But this asset class has kind of established itself as a result of, I would say, different factors. Jonas, I'm going to ask you sort of your guys' viewpoint as a bank, what assets you support. From my perspective, given we talked a lot about regulators here, and we all know the history of the SEC and other regulators. From my point of view, I kind of see the rise of meme coins as an asset class as a direct output of the stuff that we had with the ICOs in 2017, 2018, excuse me, and the lack of clear regulation. But how do you guys at the bank view, real world assets, meme coins, AI in general?
Very broad question. I'd say let's focus on the meme coin part. Sort of, we are very demand driven. If a customer, institutional client wants to have a coin enabled, we look at the coins, and if it's sort of feasible from a regulatory perspective, meaning are there reputational risk attached or not? Are there any sort of, we have our own due diligence. Much as KP already mentioned, we look at teams, we look at the code behind it. Sort of, we focus very strongly on regular or reputational risks and the feasibility when it comes to having on-chain forensics for that's main focus for that specific asset. I'm not sure whether we would classify meme coins as a new asset class, though. It's up for debate, right? I'm talking to a lot of venture capitalists in the last couple of months. It became really apparent that there was a shift away from blockchain, or away from the highest prices for tokens being the ones, or being towards the tokens that provide utility, solve real world problems. That was sort of shifted towards more of the sentiment, who has the biggest marketing teams. And so the question is not, the first question is not, are you sort of, what kind of problems, real world problems do you solve, but how big is your marketing war chest? And sort of meme coins, I'm not sure whether meme coins are the genesis of that or just a symptom, but it fits really nicely in that sentiment where we have to sort of reevaluate what value is. My problem, I mean, there is demand out there. The meme coins are getting bought, and I don't want to restrict anyone or sort of if there's a market for it, go ahead and do your own meme coin. What is troublesome, and I think where we don't look back kindly on the DLT today is when sort of influencers with 80% market share with pre-mined coins shield the coins for their own advantage, because that's all deterministic. We know exactly what is going to happen if someone owns 80% and shields a meme coin. And I sort of struggle with that idea. But other than that, I think we are open to inquire anything.
I think your point just about reputational risk, there's something to be said for brand, what it looks like when you do choose to support a certain asset from a digital perspective is well taken. I do think you make a good point about the shift from, you know, what does your coin do to how big is your marketing budget? You know, we're an attention economy, but it's interesting just to see as things have sort of evolved. As from my perspective in the market, it hasn't really rewarded projects that have actual utility that solve real world problems, whereas it's rewarded, to your point, the biggest marketing teams. Whether or not it does anything, you know, Pepe or any of these other coins, it's irrelevant. It's mostly about mind share. So. Um, KP, I want to ask you again, unique position for Robinhood, obviously, with the recent acquisition news and really good after hours report, by the way, for you guys yesterday. How do you guys look just at supporting specific meme coins? Do you have similar brand concerns that Jonas and the bank have? What is your view and Robinhood's stance on things in regard to this?
Yeah, I mean, they go through our asset listing process that I was describing earlier. So the same diligence and effort that goes into everything else is still applied. And that's the approach that we take on that.
Do you think that there's a point, obviously, like Jonas is saying, we're all aware there is demand, but do you think there's a point of calculus? Actually, this is a good question for either of you. When you look at the potential revenue share that you could get by supporting an asset versus reputational risk or this and that, is there a tipping point for that?
I mean, there's always a tipping point, right? Like, that's why we have like the frameworks set up that we have to go through it. Is it worth? It's contemplating that. Is this worth the risk of, you know, potential reputational damage or, you know, damage to customers, et cetera. And that's why the process, regardless, is going to be the same, and the diligence and effort put in is going to be the same, and it just gets determined based on that. I mean, it's not like you wouldn't necessarily have one or two people like making this decision, right? Like it is a whole process. It's not just security and technology, it's compliance, it's legal, it's regulatory,
Tech risk.
tech risk. There's so much that goes into these, and this is a lot of places too, right? Like I did this at BlockFi. I'm fairly certain like Coinbase probably does this to, you know, whatever extent they need to. I don't know if it's like a well-established like industry standard, but I would say like majority of the exchanges are doing something probably very
Along
similar.
these lines. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, I think the main distinction between you guys, KP, and us is we are mainly institutional focused. So
Right.
it's our job to sort of educate, but we're not as much as if you were retail focused. And we are execution only as well. So no advisory. That relieves somewhat of the pressure as well. So we can. Yeah.
Your use cases are probably more along the lines of like, oh, like, you know, we have institution A that wants to borrow this and give me collateral, and some of it might be in this particular token, and then you'd have to look at that token to see if you're okay to carry it and potentially what you could, you know, swap it out for if you're not, things like that.
Exactly.
Yeah, similarly at BlockFi, that's what we had to do as well. You know, you have a client who wants 100 BTC, but they're going to give you like some combination of other assets as collateral. So it's like, okay, can we support this asset? Can we support what they want to give us, number one, from a custody perspective? And then number two, are we comfortable having this on our, balance sheet somewhere? And is this okay? So like that was a similar, it was probably it was less rigorous, obviously, than like listing for retail. But still quite rigorous in like, can we hold this token? Is it going to be deemed a security? Where are we going to put it? Things like that. So
especially if the token goes on your balance sheet, I completely agree.
Right.
And I think that there's a red line. I'm sure of it also in the institution space, but I think it's more further to the right or left, depending on how you see it.
Yeah. Well, great. Just I guess to wrap up, just want to ask both of you, personal perspective doesn't have to be the bank or Robinhood perspective, but it could be. What I guess, Jonas, I'll start with you. What are you most excited about for 2025? As we cross the new year, I know we're just getting into February. Like, what do you see as very exciting for you personally this year?
Bitcoin hitting 1 million, the first, and second would be I look very closely on the developments of the payments for institutional payments on the blockchain, because I think, as I mentioned, the tech is there. I think it's about power struggle and it's about regulatory approval, and I think there are a couple of players that are very interesting, and I'd like to see some development in that space as well, and blockchain finding a real killer app.
How about you, KP?
I think it's definitely an interesting time, right? Like, and I think obviously we haven't seen prices like this before, but from a cyclical perspective, like we've been here before, and something always emerges and then something always goes down. So I think I'm just kind of interested to see what the top and what the potential bottom is going to end up being.
It's never boring, I can tell you that.
Yeah, for sure.
Jonas, I look at it kind of like your perspective with institutional payments, the emergence of stable coins. Obviously, there's 800 variants of stable coins out there, but it appears, and KP, to your point, this could change next week, but it appears that stable coins might emerge as the killer app for blockchain going forward, potentially. Check back in 6 months. I might have a different opinion, but yes. Well, that's all I have for today. I want to thank Jonas and KP for coming. I want to thank all of our attendees as well. We kind of covered a bunch of different areas here, but just to summarize, I think some of the key takeaways that I would have is the focus on getting to know your regulators, the importance of compliance. If we're going to continue to drive this future of finance, super important that we educate people that may have preconceived notions or may just not understand the tech. Other side of the house is just kind of taking advantage of where you can of efficiencies that you can gain from the blockchain versus traditional processes, which may be much longer, but obviously, to KP's point, taking like a traditional risk and tech framework look at it before making any decisions. That's all we have for today. Thank you guys. I would ask, I think Gonzalo will put up the link to the white paper here if you'd like to download it. It's available on our site. And that's everything for today. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you, KP and Jonas, and everyone have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.